Hello, everybody. My name is Garrett, and I'm very honored to be here to help moderate this panel among three DeFi legends who need absolutely no introduction. The topic that we're here to talk about is DAOs. Specifically, the topic is DAO on trial, code versus humans. Late last year, Michael and I were exchanging some DMs, and he was mentioning that he thinks that a lot of people don't really understand the overlap between where do DAOs intersect with reality. And this also happened to come at a time where both Michael's Curve DAO and Marc's Aave DAO were making some holiday, when people get together for the holidays, they like to bicker a little bit. So there was some interesting drama. I don't exactly know how it all shook out. But that being said, it is a really interesting topic as we are seeing crypto now entering its Ethereum has turned 10 years old already. The DAO was a hack in 2016. So DAOs have been very central to Ethereum ever since the beginning, and some organizations have seen tremendous success in being organized as DAOs. So, Michael, why don't you tell us your thoughts to start off the discussion on what is the intersection between Web3 and Web2, and where do DAOs crash up against reality?
Yeah, well, I don't think Web3 is really web, to be honest. So but maybe the name smart contracts for smart contracts is actually not meaningless. So they are sort of contracts, but smart contracts, they do stuff on chain only, right? So they control only everything on chain. Let's say there are tokens, maybe stable coins, maybe I don't know, maybe some whatever, and DAO can control budget, right? And DAO can control distribution of this budget. It also can control parameters of other smart contracts, and it can probably, well, there could be things DAO does not control. So, for example, in VE tokenomics, DAO does not control how a VE for example, in Curve can be unlocked. And that's actually very, very important because there should be things which DAO probably would want to do sometimes but should not do, and that keeps coordinating the DAO. But ultimately, DAO controls things on chain, and DAO, at least, I don't know, classic sort of DAO, is not something which has a legal entity by itself. At least that's how it looks to me. And that's how Curve DAO started. It started as like, I don't know, something deployed by Chad, and who knows what it is, but it actually controls Curve, and it, I would say, coordinates many people across the globe so that they I don't know, do good decisions to for Curve to grow, or whatever, to in basically they act in their own interest, but it's a coordination kind of thing. But it's still yeah, what is it legally, and is it something legally? Can it interact with the real legal world? This is something I think Gabriel thought a lot about, and would be very interesting to hear.
Sure.
Gabriel,
Yeah.
you were
I mean,
mentioned.
yeah. DAOs are, uh, they're some type of on-chain structure that is similar in some ways to legal entities, right? Like you can do automated distributions to certain people, like the way that you would do to stockholders potentially, right? But all of the logic is on-chain rather than legal. There are some legal. The problem is that we don't use the word DAO in totally consistent ways, right? Like some people call DAOs. In fact, the original the DAO, the one that Ethereum forked about, that was basically a venture fund that happened to use a smart contract as its bank account, right? And so when if you're talking about that, then like inevitably you would start to think, well, like DAO can be any type of legal entity, but the way Michael is using it, I think, is the way that it should be used, which is the pure term. All of the logic of this thing is on chain. It exists outside the law because you don't need the law to enforce any of the arrangements. The code enforces those arrangements. and so on. And so that's the pure definition of DAO. There are some adverse legal precedents, right? Like there was a case of something called Uki DAO that sort of like ran a DeFi protocol, and a court in the United States found that that DAO was an unincorporated association. But the problem, it would be bad to then assume that every DAO is definitely this unincorporated association, because they were very, very sloppy. You know, they didn't actually have all their logic on chain, and the ways that they talked about it was like they were just operating some type of business that also happened to use smart contracts at a certain point. So these things run the gamut, and you can't assume that you know what someone is referring to when they say the word DAO, because people use the term in all kinds of ways, and those all have legal implications.
All right. Marc, you've given the world a bit of a crash course in what is a DAO and what is a company in the recent kind of dispute between you and Avara. Do you want to walk people through some of the lessons of basically what you've learned from that whole experience?
Well, I will talk for hours if you get me started on that. But I think I will key upon what was just said on this. Is the first issue we have is that DAO is not well defined, because the DAO stands for decentralized autonomous organization. Not all of them are decentralized. Like some of them are just a bunch of multisig. There's not actual smart contracts that can be autonomous in the way they do things. Some of them don't have anything. So basically, they sold the token, and that token went to the founder address, and then they do some snapshot votes, which are like mostly off-chain, and nothing very interesting happened in terms of logic on chain. Some are very advanced, like the Curve DAO or the Aave DAO. In their scope. On the Aave DAO, you basically are sovereign when you are Aave token holders, because you have the last word of what happened in the protocol. You have the last word of all the protocol evolved, the risk parameters of the protocol, new version deployed of the protocol, new asset onboarded, where the treasury is allocated, all this kind of stuff, and even the token itself. So we took a different path compared to Curve, in the sense that when you have the Aave token, you can do literally anything relative to the Aave ecosystem, even acting on the token itself and the staking and all this kind of stuff. What we did is that we implemented some level of governance executor. So you have level 1, level 2. I will not get into the details, but everything is on chain and open source, so you can check that yourself. Meaning that if you want to do very critical action, like modifying the token itself or this kind of stuff, you will need much more consensus between the token holder base to execute those actions, compared to just, do I want to change the interest rate on USDC on core to be plus 50 BPS tomorrow, which is important for sure, but a bit less critical than do we want to modify the supply of the Aave token, this kind of stuff. So that's our organization. And what I want people to get from what I'm trying to say now is that the important point is that it's not autonomous, doesn't act on its own, it's self-sovereign. And that's very important, because if you, and that's the core of what happened during Christmas inside Aave, is that when you own the Aave token, what do you actually own? Do you own Aave as a whole? And that will include also the off-chain assets and the intellectual property asset, like the brand. Or do you own only the full control over the protocol and the treasury, which is already not too bad. But and the whole debate was like, what is the scope of what you own when you own Aave, and how much self-sovereign is the Aave DAO compared to the Aave ecosystem as itself. And what I like about this debate is that it has shown that the Aave token, the DAO is self-sovereign, because at the end of the day, there's a CEO of a company called Avara, there's a CEO of a company called ACI, there's several service provider, delegates, and so on and so forth. But no one can just say, it's going to be like that, and fuck off if you don't agree. And I think Aave proved that during this debate. And I think it's a good thing at the end, even if I'm not completely aligned with the full outcome yet, but it's something in progress. But the simple fact that we are having this discussion, that this discussion happen in public, and there's an on-chain vote that is defined by the token holder, for me, it's amazing. And I think it's worth fighting for. And I think it's an innovation in all we do
Yeah.
things, all we do business on chain.
It sounds like DAO is not something like a company. It's, would you say it's a little bit like a country even?
That's something that I really like as an analogy, because I like to present myself ACI as a political party. Like I represent some token holders, and I have a vision, and I present that vision to the Aave ecosystem. And then Stani, for example, with Avara, present another vision. And I'm not saying my vision is perfect and their vision is shit, or the other way around. Or even if we do that, it's a debate, but it's like a debate between two political parties that wants what's best for the country itself, which will be the Aave ecosystem.
Mhm.
And frankly, I love that. I think it's a
Yeah.
good thing.
Absolutely. That's actually something I've seen with Curve drama. Well, maybe not many people noticed because it didn't go that far as trying to debate about who owns the I don't know, who owns the brand, for example. But you know, that's it. Just didn't really require discussing that. But really, it started with well, essentially me introducing a vote to fund operations of Swiss stake from grant by CurveDAO. And well, I would say I published it without too many discussions before that, and that kind of kind of pissed off some governance participants, and um, also they wanted to actually review, are the funds getting spent well, are they getting spent for the best of the of Curve project, right? So they wanted transparency. And yeah, it was, well, the introduction of this vote, it actually attracted attention of all the governance participants. So they all tried to get involved. They tried to apparently be helpful, in terms of like how to save money, or how to possibly they offered their thoughts about how to structure things better, and that was probably very good. And after that, well, everyone talked with each other, and um, well, another vote was introduced, slightly modified, and I think it passed with some crazy big quorum. Like I don't remember, like maybe more than 80% of voting power voted. So it was pretty.
What you described, Michael, is something amazing for any organization, on-chain or off-chain, is that I think it's beneficial for any organization to have an immune system. In the sense that if you have an organization that allows the ability to have some part of it to say, hey, maybe that's a problem, and then there's a process to discuss that point, and regardless of the outcome, like if the outcome is like, yeah, maybe problem, but the majority of the people say at the end it's fine and we're gonna do things that way. It doesn't matter the outcome as much as the ability to bring some debate to the table and discuss them on equal footing, and then having the self-sovereignty of the organization say, okay, now it's time to vote, and we're gonna follow the vote and implement what the vote says. And I think it's amazing.
Yeah,
Right.
totally agree. I think that there's like one important nuance to what you just said, which is that both Aave and Curve like meaningfully give power to the token, or to the escrow token positions in the case of Curve, right? And I think that is part of why people do participate, right? In other words, if people can only complain, right, if they can only signal, and we see this in normal public companies in U.S. capital markets as well, right? Like there is a process in the United States for people to get what's called proxy access, where you can actually force something that you want voted on to be voted on at a shareholder meeting. in the United States corporations, right? And so you have to actually, and those votes could potentially be binding, right? So you have to actually give people power in order for, or some skin in the game, preferably both, in order for them to want to discuss it or for that immune system to function, right? And what has happened with a lot of quote unquote DAOs is that they took away the actual power because the DAO doesn't actually control anything, no less of letting it decide things off chain with IP or whatever. And then in many cases, you also removed the skin in the game, right? Because there was no link between the, like for a long time with Uniswap, for example, people would say that all Uni controlled was whether this certain fee switch gets turned on in this certain protocol. And yet all these other proposals got discussed, but why would anyone care how it comes out? They have no actual power over it anyway, right? And so you really need some power and some skin in the game. That can be through a voting DAO. It can be through a decision market DAO where you're more directly betting on outcomes, quantum orgs, decision markets, this sort of thing. But you need those two critical elements, at least to some extent, for the immune system to function. And a lot of DAOs are lacking those.
Gabe, could you actually, through MetaLeX, you do a ton of work on how DAOs should properly structure. You have this concept of Borg, cybernetic kind of apparatuses which can interact with reality. Can you discuss a bit more about like how you actually foresee DAOs properly getting structured?
Yeah, and should DAO actually have a legal entity or what happens if it doesn't?
There are two ways that legal entities can come into DAOs, right? One is by wrapping the DAO itself in some sort of legal entity, right? And again, Uniswap recently did that. They declared that Uniswap DAO itself is a special type of unincorporated association, which gets legal recognition in the US. That means it's going to pay taxes. In fact, it's going to be like a real legal entity, and may have to do some KYC on certain people, et cetera. Or you can have legal entities that are adjacent to the DAO, right? That wrap certain specific functions. Like, for example, Curve has a security multisig that I'm on, and we have a legal entity for that. It's a Cayman Foundation, and it wraps that security multisig and has certain rules. And you could actually have both of these. You could imagine both wrapping the entire DAO in a legal entity and also having these side entities. But the thing that, go ahead. Yes.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, just thought, imagine that some DAO, like Curve DAO, for example, was wrapped inside some legal entity. And as you said, it would require sometimes KYC certain participants. So imagine you have, well, of course, you have myself, Etherscan KYC'd me, so everyone knows that. That's good. But imagine someone, well, with some Ethereum address, nobody knows who is that, and who has quite a significant voting power. And let's say the United States come and say, oh, we want to know who that guy is because things depend on his decisions. And everyone says, oh, we cannot possibly know, and we cannot turn his votes off. It's just, impossible. These things are not in control of anything like anything enforceable. It's self-enforceable. So what? How would that work then?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's why the notion of a pure DAO is sort of intrinsically cyber anarchist, right? If they're set up properly, and to me, the autonomous in the word DAO doesn't mean automatic. It means very independent of extrinsic influences, right? And a legal entity, anywhere in the world, if you look at the legal structures that exist, they assume that is not the case. That someone that if the government gives an order to do something, that will be able to be effectuated. So I think there's a fundamental incompatibility there. And that's why I say personally, if you're going to have legal entities, put them on the side. If you want to have intellectual property, for example, and give a DAO influence over that, okay, I have a technique for doing that. We set up an entity. It says that when you do something with this intellectual property, you go and ask the DAO about it. And as long as what the DAO is telling you to do is not illegal, then maybe the rule will say that you do that, or maybe it will say the DAO vote plus some trustee, or something like that. If they both agree, then you will take that action with the intellectual property, and otherwise you won't do anything with that intellectual property.
And DAO can
Their
change
technique, but yeah.
And DAO can change the trustee, instruct the entity to transfer the
Potentially,
IP
yes.
to another entity, and so on.
Yes,
Viable.
potentially. There's a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum of designs. You could either have the DAO completely control who the trustee is, or you could say it's the DAO plus some labs entity, and they have to agree on who the trustee is, and some check and balance dynamic. So there's many ways to design this, but the point is to be very intelligent. What's a legal entity? What's meant to be code is law, right? And how do you navigate between these two regimes?
I completely agree. I think what we need to point out is like autonomous is not the right term. Self-sovereign is the better term. But
I guess so.
So in your opinion, are the various protocols represented here, Aave, Curve, Yield Basis, are they fulfilling this vision, or do you think that they could structurally reincorporate in some way to kind of better promote this concept?
Well, I think they're two of the best DAOs that are out there in terms of the pure vision of DAOs. Of course, you could somewhat improve things. As was pointed out in the Aave debate right now, Avara Labs, apparently, I haven't independently investigated this, but apparently it would claim to own like the Aave brand in some sense, or some IP. It's the legal owner of that. And so if now it could, the DAO could argue, hey, actually, we've been some type of legal entity all along, and we actually hired this labs company to make this IP for us, and so we're the real owner. I mean, they could go to some court of law and they could argue that. I have my own opinion on whether they would win that or not. Or alternatively, there could be some negotiation that just says, okay, yes, maybe you do technically own this right now, but that's not a good setup. Let's set it up in a new way. Where the DAO can, maybe the DAO doesn't completely control this IP, but it has some type of influence over it, and that's another possible, structural approach.
I think the main point is that both Curve and Aave are DeFi 1.0, like DeFi OGs, and we have to navigate in the fog of war of building stuff that are brand new and we unprecedented with not many foundation to build upon. And I think what we learned in the past few weeks is that the naivete we got to say, okay, everyone will always be friends, everyone will always be aligned for the best and building the new finance on chain and this kind of stuff. I think we reached a point like 10 years after Ethereum, 6 years after Aave, I don't know many years after Curve, but something like that, that, well, the good, we cannot operate like $billion company and organizations on goodwill alone. And you need to have rules, you need to have framework, and you need to have fail-safe. And that's something traditional finance learned a long time ago, and organization between humans learned that a long time ago, and that's why there's a job called lawyer, and there's the whole concept of regulation and this kind of stuff. And I think we reached a point, which is a very good sign of maturity, that those organizations are not just a bunch of nerds building on the side. No, they are like multi-billion organization with a lot of people involved, a lot of interest and involved. And it's time to go beyond the initial state to have something that is more future-proof. And you described a few scenarios, and I think we are in the third scenario on the Aave situation. We got a steward of the brand and the off-chain assets, and we have reason to believe that we should not operate on purely the assumption that this steward will be always aligned with the token holders. So we need to find a new Nash equilibrium in our relationship with this actor, because it's not, I know some people want to describe drama and want to build on that. It's an open world or this kind of stuff. I don't think that's the situation. I think with game theory, there's always different actors willing to maximize their own benefits. And usually you have to find an equilibrium, a chilling point, where is something that you reach a point where is an equilibrium between every party that works for everyone to keep playing the same game. And what we had so far is probably not efficient anymore, and we need to find a new point with a more graduate, fail-safe organization. And it's exciting because we're still operating in the fog of war. Like even 6 years after, even 10 years after Ethereum, we still have many things to learn. And what we do with our organization, we set precedents and jurisprudence for the whole ecosystem, and probably will have influence on how DAO will be seen in the future, and how new DAO will be structured in the future. And I think it's interesting to be at the frontier and to continue to be at the frontier.
Oh, I guess not everything is immutable. So things outside DAO, like multi-sigs or like, I don't know, organizations adjacent to DAO, they can be modified, and something can be done even if DAO itself is immutable. But I think you don't necessarily need. Well, you can, of course, write some set of rules, like human sort of rules. But I think the most important part is incentives and, I don't know, hard written rules on blockchain, which are such that every DAO participant acting in economic self-interest will drive the whole system to prosperity, essentially. Right. And like
That's what I like about token-based system, voting-based system on DAOs, is that everyone that is involved and has a voice asking in a game. That's by design. And we discussed that earlier, and I saw your comment, Michael, and I think I don't agree with the whole everything on the curve tokenomics, and that's why like my influence on the Aave tokenomics made it on a slightly different model. But what I recognize and I think has a lot of value is that when I'm in curve and I lock my token for 4 years, well, I'm in the boat and I'm not leaving that boat.
You cannot leave the boat easily, so you need to live with that, and you need to somehow talk to others to come to agreement, because otherwise it might be not good for your investment in the long run.
Exactly.
It's more like traditional corporate finance, because if you certainly like if you're pre-IPO, right, the investors are illiquid for a long time, and that's why alignment, and there's no race condition, right? Basically no one can legally sell ahead of others, right? And so it works pretty well. And then in the public company context, I mean, obviously it's more liquid, you have people moving in and moving out, but there are other factors, like for the larger players like pension funds and things like that, where actually they're not traders, right? They're taking long-term positions as well in order to have a governance role. So I think it's the crypto way of getting to a similar alignment of incentives is this vote escrow structure. And to me, it's very, very clever, honestly. Yeah.
So, Michael, I have a question for you. Marc had mentioned that Curve and Aave are 5 years old and kind of launched in this period where DAOs didn't really exist. You very recently launched Yield Basis, though, so you've had the experience of operating at a very high level with the Curve DAO for several years, and incorporated a lot of those lessons into the launch of Yield Basis and had a very successful launch. What were some of those lessons that you learned from Curve DAO that you tried to incorporate into Yield Basis tokenomics?
Right. Yeah, I think the tokenomics probably, it probably can be very similar, but there are a few differences. One is on Curve, it's pretty inconvenient that you cannot move your locked position. I mean, of course, it's because you don't want someone to sell his locked position, but actually when the position is very huge, selling that as a whole is not very easy anyway. So I thought maybe if you allow to move only like max locked position, essentially, so maybe that could be reasonable, because there are reasons other than selling for moving positions, like changing wallets because wallet was compromised, for example, or like I don't know, doing some consolidating some on some multi-sig which you want to set up for yourself and whatever. That's one thing. Another thing is on Curve, I experimented with quite a few things, and one was this boost mechanism. So DAO controls essentially incentives which go to liquidity providers in pools, and if you are a liquidity provider, you can, in Curve, you can boost your incentives by having some CRVs locked. But if you think about it, who gets the maximum benefit here? Probably someone who is present in all the pools at the same time, which is pretty hard to imagine for a physical person to do, but maybe some projects would be that. And indeed, that's how Convex, StakeDAO, and Yorn appeared. They got some essentially voting power, and they used this voting power to boost CRV production by multiple people. And so having locked your locked token boosting emissions for essentially different liquidity providers will lead to creation of projects which are built on top of Curve, and they would have some voting power. Whether they will be fully centralized or decentralized, it's not assumed here, right? It could happen either way, and you can see a problem here. Like one entity can concentrate too much voting power, and what if this entity is not decentralized? What if it is centralized? So there is a sort of vulnerability at the growth phase. So of course these entities, which could be DAOs, they they are probably aligned with the project's future, but they
but that voting power is not directly their money; it's their user money. So the issue with this kind of stuff is that the organization, like the people in control, they are in the situation with less skin in the game. Obviously, they don't want to hurt their own users because that will hurt their organization. But personally, they are with less skin in the game, and especially if you have like short-term and long-term incentive, you will be inclined to extract more short-term incentive regardless of the long-term health of the protocol, because it's not your token that are locked for 4 years. It's other people's token.
Right. So it's a threat. And that's why I thought that maybe boost mechanism, which encourages creation of these entities, is probably not good. So I did not do this boost mechanism in yield basis. But I would say that in Curve, I think all these projects on top of Curve who have voting power, they are actually good, and they probably were net positive for the system long term. But but I think that it's not necessarily always going to be the case. So maybe it's better to not encourage too much concentration of voting power in these projects.
Gabriel, earlier you mentioned the case of Uki DAO, which wasn't fully kind of officially a DAO, maybe, or kind of like just LARPing as a DAO. What is open to question to anybody, but what is your thought on some of the protocols that kind of like wrap themselves in this like sheen of pretending to be a DAO, but are actually extremely centralized? Like, what does that do to the overall crypto space?
Yeah, I mean, it damages trust and credibility, right? I mean, when you're I've been working this year, along with a lot of other crypto lawyers on trying to get a market structure bill, right? And there's been many regulatory discussions over the years, litigations over the years, and one of the things that you want to be able to say as part of those conversations is, well, this is actually a different thing from like traditional markets, traditional like centralized companies, and so it should be regulated differently. because it has different trust assumptions, different risks, et cetera, et cetera. And when people are out there, like basically calling traditional centralized things by the same names as these decentralized things, it's very unhelpful to those conversations, right? Because I think that there is a difference between buying a stock in Apple and buying a curve token, or entering into a VE curve token position, because all of the logic of that system is on chain. So, what do you mean you want to have them go hire, a big four accounting firm and do all these audited financials and stuff? All the financials are on chain. Like no one needs that, right? It doesn't make any sense. And like they can't steal the money, right? But like Apple could go and steal the money, right? Or like heavily abuse it, right? So you want to be able to draw these distinctions, and if you start calling things that in reality are more like Apple, like literally UkiDAO was a multi-sig, like they got hacked multiple times, and who knows, those guys could have even hacked themselves, right? Like there's no way to prove it, right? So it could be a theft, rather than a hack, or it could be an inside job. But when they're called the same type of thing as Curve DAO, they're both called DAOs. It makes it really, really hard for us lawyers to make these the kinds of case we want to make for a distinction.
I think to leverage on that, one big benefit of having all the logic on chain and tied to votes that happen on chain, like on the Curve system, on the Aave system, is that if tomorrow ACI goes rogue and try to pay itself $20 million from the Aave treasury because the money is there and it's generated directly from the Aave smart contract activity, the only way to do that is to publish an on-chain vote that is completely public, with a voting period that is completely public, and every single voter, like address actually voting in favor of that, will be also public and recorded on the blockchain. So you could do it. You could steal money on Aave or on Curve or this kind of stuff, but you cannot do it in a way that not all the world knows and not all the world has a full week to react. And I think that's a big benefit over like just three random guy somewhere in the world, like semi-anon or completely anon, that controls a multisig with like zero accountability and can just do something like overnight. And that's one of the benefits of DAOs, and having and especially operated with the full logic on chain compared to more traditional organization.
Yeah. But actually, I think that also applies to modifiable token economics. So imagine that DAO wanted to, DAO voters decided to remove all the tokens which belong to, I don't know, non-DAO for whatever reason, or maybe they want to print a bunch of tokens to themselves but not anyone else. That's in theory possible, but of course that would be a reputation hit, and maybe the token will go down ahead of the time, and maybe they wouldn't win much from that. But
that's something that happened. Like we have the example of Yearn. I think that it's a very interesting example because it's not like a binary, like it's not a black and white situation. So due to Andre decision, like the whole supply was minted in 1 week, like 10,000 Yearn token. And then nothing, like no emission, no inflation, nothing.
Right. Yeah.
And then you end up like 6 months, 1 year after, with like Andre moving to other things, and then you have a team of maintainer, and then there's no money anymore in the treasury. And what do you do? What do you do? Do you just drop and kill the project? Or do you change the rule of the token and create some emission and create like some allocation to the builders? And the way they did it was very public. There's been a vote to do that. And he had a reflection on the token valuation, but every single investor was aware of it. And I think it's a good example to say, yes, you can do it, but you never free from consequences.
Right. Yeah. But also I think that, well, in principle, you could actually succeed doing that in not with a good, not in a good faith, you could succeed that doing that in a bad faith if you do, I don't know, some psyops about why it is good to do, and then so all of a sudden print a bunch of tokens. But anyway, I mean, Ethereum token economics, of course, is modifiable as far as I understand. So Ethereum itself can change its emission rate and so on in upgrades. And but I don't know. For me, it kind of appeals to have immutable tokenomics, so that you cannot print. But yeah, there are some disadvantages to that for sure.
I mean, that's the point, a point where we disagree, but I respect your position. I always been in favor of upgradability because I'm not smart enough to be right now and to be right 5 years in the future and to be right 50 years in the future. The way a human operates is that things will change, like team will change, the protocol will change, the market will change, the chain will change itself. And if you close completely the door to any change in the future, you end up in situation where you are basically blocked. You need a blocker on the road, and that can possibly just kill the project. And I will give an example of modifying the supply that end up with a good situation. When we did the migration between land and Aave, we actually printed a percentage of the supply and gave it to the Aave DAO. Why? Because we created the safety module and we decided that we should have an ecosystem reserve. But the way Etlen was operated, it was one of the first ICO. Basically, the team and the treasury had no supply to allocate that and to basically have reserve to allocate this thing in order to have the safety module and incentive and this kind of stuff. So the LEN team back then, I was part of that, decided to create a new part of the supply. It was completely public. It was voted. And what we see 5 years later is that I think it was a success. I think the benefits of having changed the rule and did the migration to a new token, if we look at the historical data, probably it was a good decision. And that's why I like upgradability, because we never know what we need in the future. And as long as it's public, it's transparent, and it's something that is voted and self-sovereign, as we said earlier, I think it's a good thing. But I do understand the benefit of immutability as well. And there's two visions in DeFi. And I like that those two visions are valid at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's good to see that they are both working. But I can see that, I don't know, let's say, remember Solidly, the project launched by Andre, and well, it had some very, I would say, regrettable mistake of having inflation going too fast because of a typo, I guess. So inflation was 100 times faster than it should have been. So it was all minted within, I don't know, weeks, essentially. And that by itself killed the project by design. I mean, of course, if it was upgradable, if it was possible to fix, but well, it wasn't. So the project pretty much died. There were many forks of the project, or well, projects inspired by Solidly. Maybe Aerodrome is the most famous, and they've been quite successful. Maybe not given enough credit to their origins, but yeah, it was kind of well, if you expect these silly mistakes to happen, maybe immutability is not good. But if you make sure that they don't happen, well, of course, you sometimes you never know, but yeah,
I mean,
you have some
if
certainty.
we were completely pure about immutability, we would not have an ecosystem in the first place, because Bitcoin has a minting bug, had a minting bug in 2011, and then they had to update Bitcoin Core and just revert the chain and say, oh, oops, 21 million Bitcoin. That's it. Sorry about that. And that's how things works. Like there's always going to be mistake as long as human is involved, and as people working with code, and there's always been mistake as well like programs are involved because it works this way as well. So it is what it is. You cannot be, nothing is binary. Like it cannot be like just one thing or the other completely.
So, Gabe, I know that you're very enmeshed in a lot of the conversations around what's going on with the American legal system. From what you've seen in terms of 2026 and going forward, are DAOs safe?
Well, no. I mean, because they do have this element of radicalism to them, at least when they're done in the more pure way that we've been discussing. I think that is always threatening to existing political orders, right? And so there's always going to be a tension there. We have, and frankly, there is currently no legal framework actually passed. There's a lot of ones discussed that would be more respectful of this sort of pure DAO, but none have actually really been passed into law yet. Other than, I guess you could argue, MiCA has the European crypto regulation does have in its recitals that it's not meant to be applied to decentralized things, but then it doesn't really define what decentralized means, right? And so there can always be back trading. But I think what we have now is a permissive, an enforcement environment that's permissive toward DAOs, in the sense that everyone just kind of said, hey, we during the Gensler Biden era, there were all these like prosecution actions where we tried to fit a like square peg into a round hole. That was basically like a backdoor way of prohibiting these without any legislature actually having said, let's prohibit these. So let's stop doing that, and let's try to have like intelligent laws and policies about that. So there's been kind of like an interregnum where like everyone politically just says, even though we could probably do enforcement actions against these things, we're not going to do that for now, and let's let the legislatures do their thing and so on. But right now, the market legislation in the U.S. is stalled because there's internal debate within the crypto industry about certain provisions. So like it's very possible that like AOC or someone like that wins the next presidential election and that they hate crypto, and we could go back to wars on crypto or something even worse than the ones that we saw before. Frankly, if Kamala was going to win, I mean, a lot of people tried to argue, hey, if Kamala wins, she'll be nicer to crypto. But who people had talked to me, who the front runner would be to lead the SEC under Kamala, is someone that everyone I know who had a sense of these things thought would be even worse than Gensler, if you could imagine that. God. So I don't think this conversation is over. And one thing in particular that haven't seen yet is like tax authorities. You've never seen a tax authority go really hard after a DAO, but if they're making a lot of money at some, especially as the countries get poorer, and look at what's happening in California right now, where they're talking about a 5% wealth tax. As these countries get hungrier for money, at some point they may come after DAOs under tax laws, and that could be a big mess that we've never even seen yet.
Voting shares are going to be taxed even more, right? Essentially.
Yeah.
The issue I have with that, and I'm talking to a lawyer here, is that the whole fucking America is started because you had a few people that were like, why are we taxed when we are not represented? And the thing is that if you start to tax some entities that are not represented because they are not recognized as a legal entity, well, you end up in the same situation. So maybe we should all go to Boston and throw some tea in the ocean.
I think that is an element of why DAOs exist. It is a bit subversive, and it's a bit of a rebellion from that and from the securities laws as well.
Yeah, but I think tax-wise, if you think about DAOs voting, well, you can equally think about some foreign entity, like foreign company. And let's say, imagine it's a company in some island state, and it doesn't actually pay taxes to the U.S. So what would they do? They would probably tax some owners of this company if they are U.S. based. like, I don't know, proportionally to company revenues and whatever. So maybe the same thing they could apply to DAOs if someone, I don't know, someone has a stake in that DAO, whether it's voting stake or not voting, I don't know. They will
That's how
probably
it should be. The problem is, and that would be, like the United States is totally fine with like foreign pass-through entities, right? Because every individual holder is getting taxed. But then on the other hand, we have this elaborate set of rules called the Controlled Foreign Corporation rules, and they are very punitive because with a corporation, it's not treated. It doesn't pass through its revenues, right? It retains them, right, and just keeps circulating them and like R&Ding or whatever, and so those never go to holders or don't go to holders for a long time. And so for DAOs, I think the VE curve structure is a pretty smart one, because basically it is passing through the revenues to the VE curve position. So if anyone ever came after you and I were you, I would be like, well, look, it's basically a pass-through entity and you got to go chase those individual holders. It's not a problem. But a lot of DAOs are structured more like corporations, where they say, no, we're like a startup, and so we don't want to send the money back. We want to retain it and grow. And then as a tax authority, I would say, well, you're more like a corporation, and what we do to those, we have very strict rules about those, because we want a piece of that. And so that's where I think some of this old school DAO thinking, like Nikolai Mushigian and his old work on MakerDAO, and why are you doing the buybacks, right? Why does this structure exist, and why didn't you just retain earnings and so forth? It's actually, there's a lot of smart legalistic game theory behind that people do forget. And so, there's a bunch of discussions there, but these things matter.
I still want to take the opportunity to remember to the audience that we actually pay tax, well, at least me, in the sense that my company, called ACI, is a service provider to the Aave DAO. We don't work for free. We have a budget, and that budget is company income, and that company is incorporated and has to pay tax on corporate tax. And when that company pay me a salary, I pay income tax on that. And that's how it works. And that it's interesting. Why? Because as an individual, I'm a citizen and I'm a resident of a country, so I have to pay personal income tax. My company, as a legal entity in a country, is legally represented as a legal entity and has to pay tax because of that. But the DAO layer, which is like the upper layer, right now there's no entity, so there's no taxation on that.
Well, I guess that,
and we circle back to the things that if you want to tax those entities, give them a status.
The trick is that Aave DAO, it, let's say, collects some revenues to later support research and development of Aave by, I don't know, giving these funds to Avara or maybe someone else, but they have this pot of revenues, right? And maybe even more applies to Lido, because like Lido collects everything, I think, right? So, and I think the problem is that the United States want to get piece of that kind of stuff if that happens anywhere, if they find...
It may shock you, but I'm not against that. I'm not against the idea, but you cannot tax without representation. And that's, if you're American, I'm not American, but if you're American and you open an history book of your own history, you know how important is that, and how is that the foundation of the whole country. And if the US want to tax the Aave DAO, well, give us an actual entity with actual rights, and maybe that's something that can be discussed. I think that in the case of Aave DAO, with like 0 founder and probably 0 team member that is actually a US citizen, that there's a very shaky foundation to incorporate in the US.
Not foreign control, not controlled foreign corporation or whatever.
But that's actually a debate. Like I think a smart country today should provide like some structure to say, okay, you weird guys on chain, we will give you the full representation. We will give you rights. We will give you all this kind of stuff. And in exchange, well, you're gonna pay some tax. And I think many DAOs will say, oh, why not, if that's reasonable? Because the first one that do that, then you introduce competition between countries. Because
I mean, the U.S. has kind of done that with this, UNA thing, set up by A16Z. But I think I would say it's at the state level. It still feels a little bit kludgy, and it's sort of like not good enough. If I were going to do something like that in some jurisdiction, I was like king for the day in some jurisdiction, I would just say, you know what, we will just like grant a certain type of personhood to a certain type of smart contract system. You can opt into it, and there's no KYC, there's no reporting. All you have to do is just send 1% of the revenues of the system to our smart contract, our government
nice.
smart contract, once a year. And we're just going to do that. It's a complete safe harbor. You're totally outside the normal system, and just send us that 1%. Pass a proposal in your DAO to make that automatic or whatever. We're not going to ask any other questions. And I mean, I think that like some DAOs would probably do this to be able to say, hey, I now have the legal protection of I don't know what's a nation state that might do this. Lithuania, back in the day, used to have a lot of pro crypto stuff. We're now a Lithuania DAO, and we're a person in Lithuania, and don't attack us, because if you do, you're attacking Lithuania.
Just start a new country, really.
That's right. Yes, that's the ideal. Yes.
I mean, if we are successful enough, I heard like this day you can buy out countries. So maybe if we are if we all team up like Curve, Hyperliquid, Aave, Maker, we can buy out Greenland before Trump is able to do it.
Nice.
All right, gentlemen, I think we're coming close to the end of our time slot. So definitely want to thank you all for sharing your perspectives. And before we go, one final question for all of you. And of course, I think most people know where to find you, but if they don't, then just let people know where they can find and ask questions of you people have follow-up questions. I guess the question I'd have for all of you is that we've talked a lot about kind of these ridiculous DAO complications and headaches, and it's still very much in a confusing state. But that being said, especially for people who are looking at launching new projects, would you recommend to people that despite all these kind of weird idiosyncrasies that DAOs have, would you recommend that they actually do launch and do it in a decentralized DAO type manner?
I would. I think if there's going to be legal protections from it, because it is decentralized, it is transparent, it is different, and so there's frankly an arbitrage opportunity there. And I also still believe in what Nikolai Mushigian and some originally said about MakerDAO, which is that if you have the right type of thing, a dumb durable software object, because of the trust minimization that it can achieve and the constraints that it has embraced, can outperform a centralized organization in certain dimensions. And so that's a bet that you can take. It's a bet I still personally believe. And I think we've seen it with Curve, and we've seen it with Aave, in fact, where there were more centralized things that tried to do what Aave did, and they didn't last. Why? Because they couldn't solve the trust problems that are solved by putting that logic on chain and creating those incentives and so on and so forth. So I would still say it can be a good bet in the right domain.
I completely agree with that. So I have nothing to add.
Yeah, I think there are a few things where DAOs are better, and there are a few things where DAOs are not better. So DAOs probably don't move as fast as centralized companies, actually, because you have everyone agreeing on something, and there is a lot of coordination to happen, and it's like a country, really, in a sense. But there are positive things about that, because you don't really trust someone to control your project, because you distributed the control and you actually did that. So yeah,
That's something I want to disagree with, actually. because in the way we organize things on Aave and on other DAOs is that you have service provider doing the execution part of work.
Right.
And instead of having like, because I've seen both sides of the story, like I was part of the Atlant team, then the Aave team, then ACI team. And I've seen during my career a lot of startups succeed and grow big. And first, you are like 10 guys that are super focused, all share the same vision, the same hunger to succeed. Then overnight, you have some success, and you are like 120 guys. And then you have even more success, and then you have 1,000 guys. And I've seen that at Consensus, I've seen that at Polygon, I've seen that at Aave, part of my career. And when you end up with 1,000 guys, you don't have people as focused, and you start to have like a governance and corporate politics. You have the HR government, all this kind of stuff, compliance that gets into the way, and you actually are less focused and less able to execute fast. And that's something I've seen many times. With the DAO model, at Aave, we have 7 very focused, very small service providers that has a scope, and they execute on their scope. Chaos Lab, they do risk for Aave. They don't fucking care about growth or this kind of stuff. Obviously, it's important to them. They discuss with us this kind of topic. But what they do is to make sure the Aave users are safe and the risk parameter are same. And they do that, and they do that very well. Lamarist, they do the same thing in their own way, and we make sure that both opinions are valuable and the Aave users are safe. But they don't create Aave v4, they don't create Aave v5, they don't draw partnership. And what you have is that those 7 companies, the biggest one is probably Aave Labs, but Aave Labs is like 50, 60 people. It's not something huge for $1 billion protocol. And at ACI, we are 10. At BG Labs, there's 11 people. You have the ability with DAO that are focused on the service provider system, that you have the ultimate decision in the end of the token holders. They decide, they can fire me, and they can fire the other guys and make sure they have the last word on everything. But the service provider, they remain small and focused. And that's why I think Aave being a DAO is more efficient than our competitors, and we were actually able to execute faster than everybody else that operate as a single team in our segment.
All right,
So
no one.
DAO. That's great.
All right, so this has been DAO on trial, and I would say that means that we've put DAOs on trial, and we gave it a not guilty verdict, or a verdict of you should give it a shot. So thank you, everyone, and we'll include a bunch of links to some of the supplemental stuff we talked about below.
Thank you.